1970 marked the end of the Beatles, a group of friends who grew up together, from their early days in Liverpool to the crazy 8-hour shows in Hamburg's red light district, and eventually having the world at their feet in the early 60s. Their journey included sonic experimentation and the creation of music that will forever be remembered alongside the works of Mozart and Beethoven. Although the breakup of the Beatles was messy, their legacy remains unshaken, and they shall be remembered forevermore as the greatest band the world has ever seen. In today's video, we'll talk about the Beatles' final year and the Beatles' breakup. It's gonna get a little bit sad, but also they made amazing music during this time, so that kind of makes up for it, doesn't it? Hello, by the way, and welcome to my Beatles YouTube channel. If you like the Beatles, please make sure you subscribe and you check out my other videos because you're definitely gonna find them interesting. So, let's go! On the 2nd of January 1969, the Beatles met at Twickenham Film Studios in London to begin rehearsals of new songs for an eventual TV show for worldwide transmission, under the working title Get Back. Michael Lindsay Hogg was the director. The idea was to show the Beatles rehearsing, jamming, getting their act together, and then finally performing somewhere in a big end-of-the-show concert. Named after a Paul McCartney song, Get Back, it suggested the need to get back to simpler times, when their music was less complex and it could be performed live easily with the technology they had available at the time. John Lennon even said to producer George Martin, "For this one, I don't want any of your production crap. I want an honest album that when I listen to it, I know that we've done it." On the 10th of January, during the sessions, George Harrison had enough and decided to leave the band. Reflecting on the incident later for the Beatles Anthology project, Harrison attributed his departure to a number of factors, among them the presence of film cameras, which he found particularly annoying when the Beatles weren't getting along. "They were filming Paul and I having a row," he said. "It never came to blows, but I thought, what's the point of this? I'm quite capable of being relatively happy on my own, and if I'm not able to be happy in this situation, I'm getting out." It was a very difficult and stressful time, and being filmed having a row as well was terrible. I got up and thought, I'm not doing this anymore. After George left, John said, "If he's not back by Monday, we'll get Eric Clapton in. He's just as good and not such a headache." On the 15th of January, George accepted to rejoin the Beatles. His main condition was that the band was to continue the Get Back project in the Apple studio, located in the basement of 3 Savile Row, the headquarters of the Beatles company called Apple Corps. He also insisted on inviting Billy Preston to join the Get Back sessions, in the hope that his skills as a keyboard player and his good mood would help the Beatles work together nicely, both musically and personally. A strategy that had already worked the previous year when George invited his close friend Eric Clapton to record his song While My Guitar Gently Weeps. On the 18th of January, John speaks about important financial problems in Apple, warning that it will collapse because of its continuous losses. A statement that certainly didn't help Apple's credibility or help boost the morale of the staff. On the 20th of January, the shooting moved to the 3 Savile Row basement, where a new studio has been installed by Alexis Madras, the Beatles' Greek friend known as Magic Alex, who became head of Apple Electronics. The studio quickly proved to be substandard, with several acoustic problems and lacking basic equipment that producer George Martin had to borrow from EMI Studios at Abbey Road. On the 28th of January, John and Yoko met Alan Klein for the first time at the Dorchester Hotel in London. John was very impressed with Klein and insisted he should manage the Beatles. George and Ringo liked Klein, but Paul certainly didn't. They've heard horrible things about Klein from Mick Jagger, whose band, the Rolling Stones, had been managed by Klein since 1965. Paul wanted his father-in-law and brother-in-law to manage the Beatles, as the Eastman's law firm already had a good reputation in show business in New York. But the other Beatles saw this as an attempt from Paul to have more control over the band. The Get Back sessions continued throughout January and were incredibly tense. Eventually, the Get Back project was abandoned, culminating on a final impromptu live performance on the 30th of January from the rooftop of the Apple headquarters. Joined by guest keyboardist Billy Preston, the band played a 42-minute set before the Metropolitan Police arrived and ordered them to reduce the volume. It was the final public performance of their career. They performed 9 takes of 5 new songs, as crowds of onlookers, many on lunch breaks, congregated in the streets and on the rooftops of nearby buildings to listen. The concert ended with Get Back and John Lennon joking, "I'd like to say thank you on behalf of the group and ourselves, and I hope we've passed the audition." Initially, the Beatles had bigger plans for this final live performance, with location ideas as crazy as the deck of an ocean liner or an ancient amphitheater. But they didn't want to travel, so they decided to do it in their very own rooftop. In February, Paul spent some time producing Steve Miller for Apple Records. Ringo started filming a movie called The Magic Christian. George got his tonsils removed, and John and Yoko worked on their world peace campaign and several conceptual art projects. On the 2nd of March, the Beatles were offered $4 million to perform 4 concerts in America. They refused the offer. On the 12th of March, Paul McCartney married the American photographer Linda Eastman at Marylebone Register Office in London, to the anguish of thousands of young women. His brother Mike was best man. No other Beatles attended. After the wedding, they flew to New York with Linda's daughter Heather. During this trip, Paul wrote the song You Never Give Me Your Money about Alan Klein. The same day Paul got married, police officer Norman Pilcher registered the Harrison's Surrey house. George and Patty were arrested for possession of cannabis. While Paul was in New York, the Beatles held a meeting to appoint Alan Klein as their business manager. Paul sent his solicitor to vote against it, but he was outvoted. Paul refused to sign any contracts as he opposed the decision. On the 20th of March, possibly inspired by Paul McCartney's wedding, John Lennon and Yoko Ono got married in Gibraltar. Following the wedding, on the 25th of March, they entered the Hilton Hotel in Amsterdam to start a 4-day bed-in protest. On the 27th of March in London, Ringo confirms they will not play before a live audience again. On the 31st of March, after their bed-in protest, John and Yoko held a press conference at the Hotel Sacher in Vienna. They spoke from inside a white bag, starting what they called baggism. The idea was that if they couldn't see you, no one could judge you based on your ethnicity, sex, or age. They would later start a company called Back Productions Limited, operating from a vacant office at 3 Savile Row as their headquarters for their world peace campaign. On the 11th of April, the Beatles released their single Get Back, Don't Let Me Down. On the 14th of April, John and Paul recorded the Ballad of John and Yoko, in which John tells the story of getting married with Yoko in Gibraltar. George and Ringo were busy, but John insisted that the song had to be recorded immediately. On the 22nd of April, John changed his name from John Winston Lennon to John Ono Lennon. On the 13th of May, the Beatles gathered at the EMI headquarters in Manchester Square in London for a photoshoot with Angus MacBean for the Get Back LP cover. The idea was to recreate the cover of their first album, Please Please Me. The album Get Back was scheduled for release in July, although it would eventually be postponed. On the 30th of May, the Beatles released The Ballad of John and Yoko and Old Brown Shoe, the first Beatles single not mixed for mono. On the 1st of June, John and Yoko recorded Give Peace a Chance at the end of the 8-day bed-in protest in Montreal, Canada. On the 27th of June, Ringo and Maureen go on holiday to the south of France. 2 days later, John, Yoko, Kyoto and Julian go to Scotland on holiday. While they were in Scotland, they were involved in a car accident on the 1st of July. John was a notoriously bad driver who had rarely been behind the wheel since passing his test in 1965. He was poor at navigating roads and often failed to notice other traffic. The roads were narrow, the weather was poor, and Lennon panicked after spotting a foreign tourist driving towards him. He lost control of the car, driving it into a roadside ditch. He, Yoko, and Kyoto sustained cuts to the face, and Yoko's back was injured. Julian Lennon was treated for shock, but was otherwise unhurt. Back in London, the Beatles had already started working on Abbey Road. The idea was that the band would work the way they used to, with George Martin actually producing the sessions. George Martin said to Paul, "If you want to work the way we used to, then you have to be the way you used to." John joined them as soon as he was recovered, getting a bed installed in the studio for Yoko, provided with a microphone so she could comment on the session. The Beatles did actually manage to work the way they used to. The result was one of the best albums in music history. Abbey Road incorporates styles such as rock, pop, blues, and progressive rock, and makes prominent use of the Moog synthesizer and guitar played through a Leslie speaker. It's also notable for having a long medley of songs on side 2. In this album, George Harrison's songwriting reaches an unprecedented level, with songs like Here Comes the Sun and Something, which according to Frank Sinatra was the greatest love song of the last 50 years, although he mistakenly attributed it to Lennon and McCartney. The album was originally going to be called Everest, but eventually they called it Abbey Road after the street where EMI studios were located. The photoshoot session for the cover took place on the 8th of August, showing the Beatles crossing the street just outside the studios, a photo copied by bands, tourists, and Beatles fans forevermore. The final sequencing of the album came together on the 20th of August, the last time all 4 Beatles were present in a studio together. On the 22nd of August, the Beatles united for a final photographic session. It was also the last occasion in which all 4 members were together for band duties. Thereafter, their only meetings were business related. The photoshoot took place in the house and grounds of Tittenhurst Park, John and Yoko's new home. On the 28th of August, Mary McCartney is born to Paul and Linda. On the 31st of August, George, Ringo, John, Patty, Maureen and Yoko attended the Festival of the Isle of Wight to see the Bob Dylan show. On the 20th of September, John Lennon announces to the others that he's leaving the band. John's announcement never made it to the press because of their newly negotiated royalty contract they signed with EMI. After the meeting, John said to Yoko, "I'm done with these guys. From now on, it's just you and me." On the 13th of September, John Lennon and the Plastic Ono Band performed at the Toronto Rock and Roll Festival. During this performance, the band recorded an Apple album later released as The Plastic Ono Band Live Peace in Toronto 1969. On the 26th of September, Abbey Road is released. It topped the charts in both the United States and the United Kingdom. On the 6th of October, the songs Come Together and Something are released as a single, also topping the charts. On the 9th of October, Yoko is admitted to hospital on John's 29th birthday, where she suffered another miscarriage. John stayed by her side the whole time. On the 11th of October, the Beatles signed a new record deal with EMI negotiated by Alan Klein. At this time, the Get Back documentary is cut down to half its original length and it's retitled Let It Be. On the 20th of October, the Plastic Ono Band released Cold Turkey, their first single. The same day, John and Yoko's wedding album was also released. Hi, sorry to interrupt the video. Just a very quick, very important announcement. I published a book. That's right, I published a book. It's called From the Cavern to Abbey Road, a journey through the Beatles' iconic landmarks. In this book, we see the story of the Beatles from the places where everything happened. Some of them are famous, like let's say Abbey Road Studios, and some of them perhaps not so famous, like for example the art gallery where John and Yoko met. The book is divided in 4 sections: Liverpool, Hamburg, London, and the last one is all around the world, so of course I called it Here, There and Everywhere. I put a lot of work and effort into this book, and it would help me so much if you grabbed a copy. It's available on Amazon all around the world, and it comes in 2 different formats. One is a digital book for Kindle, and the other one is the paperback, which is the one that I've got in my hands right now. So if you want your copy, please go to the link in the description. Thank you. Now back to the video. On the 22nd of October, a frustrated Paul McCartney escaped to his farm in Scotland with his family and stayed until mid-December. Depressed due to the Beatles breakup, he started drinking a lot and he stopped shaving. On the 27th of October, Ringo begins the recording of Sentimental Journey, the first Beatle formally recording a solo LP. On the 29th of October, the Rat magazine publishes the Paul is Dead theory, starting the rumor that Paul McCartney died in 1966 and was replaced by an actor named William Campbell. A rumor that some people believe even today. On the 24th of November, still in his Scottish farm, Paul talks about the Paul is Dead rumors in an interview. On the 25th of November, John returns his Member of the British Empire (MBE) medal to the Queen. The letter he sent read, "Your Majesty, I am returning this MBE in protest against Britain's involvement in the Nigeria-Biafra thing, against our support of America in Vietnam, and against cold turkey slipping down the charts. John Lennon of Bag." December 1969 would see a very active John and Yoko with the launch of their War is Over campaign. 1970 started with the last recording session of the Beatles on the 3rd and 4th of January at Abbey Road Studios. They recorded George's song "I Me Mine" and also some overdubs for Let It Be. Only Paul, George and Ringo attended the session. Written at a time of conflict within the group, "I Me Mine" laments humankind's propensity for self-centeredness and served as a comment on the discord that led to George Harrison temporarily leaving the group. On the 15th of January, John inaugurates Bag 1, an exhibition of some of his lithographies and drawings at the London Arts Gallery. The very next day, the police closes the exhibition under the charge of obscenity. However, it was later reopened. John and Yoko stayed in Denmark over the New Year and most of January 1970 to be with Ono's daughter, Kyoto. She was living there with Yoko's second husband. On the 20th of January, John and Yoko cut their hair short. The next day, the Daily Express published that John cut his hair to be able to travel without being recognized. On the 26th of January, George Harrison released his hit single My Sweet Lord, together with Isn't It a Pity. It was the first #1 single by an ex-Beatle. Harrison originally gave My Sweet Lord to his fellow Apple Records artist Billy Preston, who recorded a gospel version produced by George. Harrison wrote the song in praise of the Hindu god Krishna. Later in the 1970s, My Sweet Lord was at the center of a heavily publicized copyright infringement lawsuit due to its alleged similarity to the Ronnie Mac song He's So Fine. On the 6th of February, John and Yoko released their single Instant Karma. On the 12th of March, George and Patty Harrison moved into Friar Park, an imposing Victorian neo-Gothic mansion in Oxfordshire. The site covered about 35 acres and featured caves, underground passages, and beautiful gardens that George dedicated the rest of his life to maintain. He even said to his wife that he'd like to be remembered as a gardener who had a few hit records. At this time, Paul is sent a copy of the remix of his song The Long and Winding Road, which has been overproduced by Phil Spector using his famous wall of sound technique, adding strings and a choir. The record came with a note from Alan Klein, saying that he thought the changes were necessary. Paul, who never had so much as a note altered by producer George Martin, absolutely hated the changes, and ended up sending a letter to Klein on the 14th of April warning him never to interfere with a recording of his again. On the 27th of March, Ringo released his first solo album called Sentimental Journey. In the cover, we can see the Empress, a pub just around the corner from Ringo's childhood home in Liverpool. Ringo's mother, Elsie, would sometimes serve in the pub. Around this time, Alan Klein hears of Paul's solo album and has its release postponed to the 4th of June in order to release Let It Be first. When Paul heard about it, he was furious, and he called George saying that he wanted to be removed from Apple Records. To which George replied, "You're staying on the f***ing label, Hare Krishna," and hung up. A few days later, Ringo went to Paul's house at 7 Cavendish Avenue to deliver a letter from John and George, notifying him of the new release date for his first solo album. Paul was angry and ordered Ringo out of the house at once. On the 9th of April, Paul sent copies of his first solo album titled McCartney to the press, including a questionnaire suggesting that the Beatles have split. with questions like, "Are you planning a new album with the Beatles?" Answer, no. Did you miss the Beatles and George Martin? Was there any moment when you thought, for example, "I wish Ringo was here for this break"? Answer, no. The very next day, all newspapers' headlines read, "Paul is quitting the Beatles," to which he later replied, "I didn't leave the Beatles have left the Beatles." John Lennon later said no one liked being a Beatle as much as Paul. In 1968, during the White Album sessions, Ringo had left the band. And in 1969, during the Get Back sessions, George left the band, although they both rejoined soon afterwards. It was finally John who decided to leave the band for good. Paul, however, ended up making the headlines. On the 17th of April, Paul releases McCartney. The album was recorded in secrecy, mostly using basic recording equipment at his house in St. John's Wood. Apart from occasional contributions by his wife Linda, McCartney performed the entire album alone by overdubbing on a 4-track machine. McCartney received mostly negative reviews, while McCartney himself was vilified for seemingly ending the Beatles. The record was widely criticized for being underproduced. In later years, however, the album was credited for influencing DIY musicians and lo-fi music styles. On the 18th of April, the music video for Maybe I'm Amazed was released, containing pictures taken by Linda. Later in his career, Paul said that if there's one song he would like to be remembered for, it was Maybe I'm Amazed. Depressed by the Beatles' breakup, Paul went back to his Scottish farm. John was also depressed and bad-tempered, and, encouraged by Yoko, started a treatment called primal therapy in the US. On the 8th of May, almost a month after the group's public breakup, the Beatles released their last album, Let It Be, together with the documentary of the same name, both recorded during the Get Back sessions of January 1969. Let It Be topped the charts in several countries, including both the UK and the US, but it was a critical failure at the time, and came to be regarded as one of the most controversial rock albums in history. In 2003, Paul released Let It Be Naked, an alternative version of Let It Be that removes Spector's embellishment and alters the tracklist. In 2021, an extended version of the Get Back sessions was released as a documentary directed by Peter Jackson. It's called The Beatles Get Back. Back in 1970, on the 20th of May, Let It Be, the documentary, premiered at the London Pavilion in Piccadilly Circus and in Liverpool. None of the Beatles attended. That evening, George went to the studio with producer Phil Spector, beginning work on his first solo album, All Things Must Pass. On the 15th of June, Paul's father-in-law, Lee Eastman, sent a letter to Alan Klein saying that the Beatles should be dissolved immediately. Klein never replied. On the 7th of July, George Harrison's mother, Louise French, died of cancer in Liverpool. George was there with her when she passed away. On the 31st of July, John's first wife, Cynthia Powell, married Roberto Bassanini. On the 1st of August, Yoko suffered another miscarriage. On the 25th of September, Ringo released his new solo album. The next day, John started the recordings for the Plastic Ono Band album. At the same time, George was working on his album also at Abbey Road. Around this time, Paul boarded an ocean liner to New York. While he was in America, he started working on his second solo album, and he started auditioning guitarists and drummers. On the 11th of November, Lee Parkin Starkey is born to Ringo and Maureen. Around this time, Alan Klein planned to trap Paul by telling the other Beatles to invite him to a recording session for Ringo's new song, early 1970. If Paul attended, it would have shown that they were still working together and undermined any potential lawsuits. Paul didn't attend the session. On the 30th of November, George released All Things Must Pass, a triple album primarily containing songs that he wrote over the Beatles' years but didn't get approved by John and Paul, or he didn't even bother to pitch to them. Several commentators interpret the album cover photo showing Harrison surrounded by 4 garden gnomes as a statement of his independence from the Beatles. All Things Must Pass was critically and commercially successful on release, with long stays at number 1 on charts worldwide. On the 11th of December, John Lennon Plastic Ono Band's album was released. At the time of issue, it received mixed reviews overall. but later came to be widely regarded as one of Lennon's best solo albums. It features a largely raw production sound, with songs heavily influenced by Lennon's recent Primal Scream therapy. Its lyrics reflect Lennon's personal issues and include themes of child-parent abandonment and psychological suffering, most obvious in the songs Mother and My Mommy Is Dead. Because McCartney couldn't sue Alan Klein directly, since the Beatles had appointed him their manager, Paul's lawyers, his father-in-law and brother-in-law, made it clear to him that the only way to end the deadlock was to take legal action against the other three Beatles. So, on the 31st of December 1970, McCartney filed a lawsuit in the London High Court against Lennon, Harrison, Starr and Apple Corps, demanding the dissolution of the Beatles. "I was thought to be the guy who broke up the Beatles and the bastard who sued his mates," said McCartney in 2020. And believe me, I bought into that. It was so prevalent that for years I almost blamed myself. 1970 marked the end of the Beatles, a group of friends who grew up together, from their early days in Liverpool to the crazy 8-hour shows in Hamburg's red light district, and eventually having the world at their feet in the early 60s. Their journey included sonic experimentation and the creation of music that will forever be remembered alongside the works of Mozart and Beethoven. Although the breakup of the Beatles was messy, their legacy remains unshaken, and they shall be remembered forevermore as the greatest band the world has ever seen.
So, there you go. That was the breakup of the Beatles. A bit of a sad story, really, but I think we should be happy that they got together in the first place and they made all this amazing music that they left us. Also, on the bright side, from the Beatles breakup, instead of having one band, we have 4 individual artists, so that's a lot more music, really. In the next video, we'll see what the Beatles did after the Beatles. So, this is pretty much it for now. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. You can also follow me on Instagram or Facebook. There is a PayPal link for donations. Of course, every donation will be absolutely appreciated. You can also buy my book. Actually, that would make me very happy indeed. The Amazon link is in the description. Or the free option is just to subscribe to this YouTube channel and maybe click the bell icon so you're the first to know when I upload new videos. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye.
Well, I'm afraid that's us run out of time.
Oh,
I'm really
okay.
sorry.
Oh,
sorry.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I give my heart to you, I must be sure from the very start that you